Los Angeles, spring of 1973. The Pacific Martial Arts Coliseum has been hosting events for 3 years, and tonight is the biggest night it has seen. The International Women's Karate Championship, pulling serious competitors from 11 countries, 500 practitioners in the audience who know exactly what they are watching, and somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 general spectators who came because the event had built real momentum and real reputation across its previous 2 years. The woman who won tonight deserved to win. That part needs to be said clearly before anything else, because the story that follows is not about her skill, which was genuine, or her record, which was real. It is about something else entirely. Her name was Vera Holman, 28 years old, originally from West Germany, trained in traditional Shotokan for 15 years. Her record going into tonight was 51 wins, 3 losses, all 3 losses coming in the first 2 years of her career, nothing in the 5 years since. She moved through today's bracket with the systematic efficiency of someone who has been here before and knows exactly how each match is going to resolve. The final was against a Japanese competitor who lasted 3 rounds before the judges scored it decisively. Vera received the decision cleanly and stood in the center of the competition floor with the composure of a champion who expected this and had prepared specifically for this, and was not particularly surprised that this was the outcome. The audience response was genuine. These were people who understood what they had watched and were responding to it honestly. Now, before we get to what happens next, and what happens next is one of the most uncomfortable and then extraordinary things this competition has ever seen. If you are watching this video and you have not subscribed yet, do that now. Because the next 3 minutes of this story are the reason this channel exists. The event coordinator, a man named Gerald Parks who had been organizing martial arts events for a decade, had arranged a surprise for the awards ceremony. He had been in contact with Bruce Lee's manager for several weeks, working out the logistics of a guest appearance. Bruce had agreed to attend the evening and to present the championship trophy personally, which Gerald considered a genuine coup for the event, and had been quietly excited about for the entire lead-up period. The audience knew. The competitors did not. Specifically, though word had moved through certain sections of the audience during the evening as people spotted Bruce in the reserved section near the front. The specific ripple of recognition that Bruce's presence always produced, quiet and spreading, had moved through the seats in the second and third rounds. Vera Holman did not know. This matters because it explains the genuine surprise in what followed. When Gerald took the microphone after the final to begin the awards ceremony and said that he was delighted to introduce a special guest who would be presenting tonight's championship, and the audience responded with the specific enthusiastic noise of people who have been holding on to something they were told to keep quiet about, Vera looked toward the entrance from the position she occupied at the center of the competition floor, and she watched Bruce Lee walk out. She knew who he was. The martial arts community in 1973 knew who he was. Enter the Dragon had been out for several months, and the response to it had been the kind of response that moved through every corner of every related community simultaneously. She watched him cross the floor toward her with the championship trophy in his hands, and something moved across her face that the people close enough to see it clearly would disagree about in their accounts of the evening. Some said it was surprise, some said it was something colder than surprise. The people who knew her best, and were watching specifically, said it was the expression she wore when she had decided something. Bruce reached the center of the floor and stopped a few feet from her, and smiled, and extended the trophy toward her. She looked at the trophy. She looked at him. She did not take it. There was a moment, maybe 2 seconds, where nobody in the building moved, the specific freeze of a room that has just realized something unexpected is happening and hasn't yet processed what kind of unexpected. Vera turned toward the microphone that Gerald was holding and reached for it. Gerald gave it to her, out of reflex, the automatic response of someone who has been doing event coordination long enough that microphone requests get honored without immediate analysis. She said, into the microphone. In English, that was precise and clear and slightly accented. I want to say something before this continues. The room was very quiet, she said. I have trained for 15 years. I have competed seriously across 11 countries. I have won this championship through work that has cost me more than most people in this room understand. And the person who has been brought here to present this trophy to me is a film actor. She paused. The silence in the room had the quality of held breath. I mean no personal disrespect, she said, and then said something that made clear she meant a great deal of personal disrespect. But I do not want my championship presented by someone who has built a career performing martial arts for cameras. This is a real competition. This trophy represents real achievement. The person who presents it should have earned the right to present it. She looked at Bruce. I'm sure you are a very talented performer, but this stage is for fighters, not actors who take advantage of what serious practitioners have spent their lives building to make movies. The silence deepened. Even the ambient noise of a large gathering, the rustling and small movements that large crowds always produce, was absent. 3,000 people simultaneously holding perfectly still. Bruce stood where he had been standing, holding the trophy, his expression not having significantly changed from how it was when he crossed the floor. He looked at Vera with the quality of attention he gave everything, which was complete and without any of the reactive heat that most people would have been managing right now. Gerald Parks took a step toward the center of the floor, already running the logistics of how to salvage this, what words to say, what procedural move could reframe what was happening, before it went further. Bruce held up one hand, lightly, the kind of gesture that isn't a command, but is a clear indication. Gerald stopped. Bruce said, "May I say something?" Vera gestured toward the microphone she was still holding, a gesture that was permission and also a kind of challenge. He crossed the small distance between them, and she held the microphone between them. He said, "I have been training since I was 13 years old. I have been studying martial arts seriously for over 20 years. I have students across 2 countries who train in the system I've developed. What you see in my films is real technique. The camera shows it. It doesn't create it." He paused. "I understand why you might make the assumption you've made. Most people do, before they've had the chance to find out otherwise." He said this without any edge in it, just a statement of a fact about how information travels. Vera said, "Find out otherwise." The room made a sound. "If you're a martial artist," she said, "show me. Don't tell me, show me. Right here, in front of this audience, on this floor. Let's actually find out what is real and what is performance." Gerald Parks had started moving again, faster this time, arriving at the edge of the conversation with the expression of a man who has organized tonight's event and is watching it become something that wasn't in the program. "I don't think that's," he started. Bruce said, "It's fine." Gerald looked at him. "Bruce, it's a genuine question," Bruce said. "It deserves a genuine answer." He looked at Vera. "What are the terms? If you're still watching this, you already know this is not going where either of them expected. Subscribe if you haven't. What comes next is the part this story has been building toward." Vera set the terms cleanly, the way a serious competitor sets terms, with precision and without performance. Karate rules, point scoring, light contact, since this was a formal occasion rather than a competitive event. The competition floor's referee, who was still present from the final, would officiate. Bruce acknowledged the terms with a nod. The referee looked at both of them. He looked at Gerald, who looked at the ceiling briefly and then back at the floor, and said, under his breath, something that nobody nearby would fully repeat afterward, and then gave a small nod that meant, "Go ahead." The audience had settled into the specific stillness of people who understand that something genuinely unprecedented is occurring in front of them. Vera took her position. Her Shotokan stance was textbook, built from 15 years of daily practice, everything in exactly the position it had been trained to occupy. Her guard was high and correct, her weight distributed precisely, her chin at the trained angle. Bruce stood in the way he stood, which looked like nothing specific, and was something very specific. The particular readiness that came from a different relationship to what readiness meant. The referee indicated they could begin. Vera moved immediately. She was not tentative. She had asked for this, and she came forward with the full intention of a competitor who is taking something seriously. A front kick, aimed at mid-range to establish distance, fast and technically clean. Bruce's body shifted. Not much. The kick passed through the space his midsection had been occupying, and his right hand came forward and touched her kicking leg at the shin. Light contact, a notation. She recovered and came back with a reverse punch, her best technique, the one she had built across 15 years and 51 wins, thrown with the full rotation of hip and shoulder that generates real power. Bruce wasn't where it arrived. His head had moved offline by maybe 4 inches, the minimum required, and from that position, his left hand touched her extended arm at the wrist. Another notation. She reset and came with a combination, jab into cross into hook, 3 connected techniques meant to overwhelm a defensive response, moving as a unit rather than 3 separate strikes. Bruce slipped the jab, deflected the cross with a touch to her forearm, and stepped inside the hook entirely, getting into the space where it couldn't develop its arc, and his right hand came to rest against her sternum. Not a strike, a placement. 2 fingers, open hand, touching the center of her chest with the lightness of someone placing a piece of paper on a table. He held it for 1 count. 7 seconds had elapsed from the referee's signal. The Coliseum produced a sound that I don't have a precise word for. Not a cheer, not a gasp. Something that contained elements of both, and also something else. The collective vocalization of 3,000 people whose understanding of what they were watching had just been fundamentally revised. Bruce lowered his hand and stepped back to neutral. Vera stood in the position the exchange had put her in. She was not hurt. Nothing had struck her with force. She was standing with 2 fingers' worth of contact on her sternum as the most recent physical data point she had received, and she was processing the fact that her combination, the combination she had used to win 51 professional bouts, had produced nothing except a demonstration of what it could have produced if the man across from her had chosen to use the available opportunities differently. She looked at Bruce. He waited. She came again. This exchange was different because she had updated. She was not repeating the first exchange. She was incorporating what it showed her and coming with a different approach, lower this time, trying to change the geometry. A sweeping kick aimed at his lead leg, trying to take his base out from under everything else. He stepped over it. The timing was precise, the kick passing under his lifted foot, and as it did, his hand found her shoulder from above. Another placement. Another demonstration of available real estate. She pulled back and tried one more time, this time throwing her most trusted finishing technique, a spinning back kick that had ended matches, thrown with real commitment and real speed. He stepped inside the rotation. Inside the arc, where the kick had no power because it couldn't complete its intended extension, and from that inside position, his open hand touched the back of her neck. Light, held for a count. She was unfinished. He was behind her. The count made that clear. He stepped back. The audience erupted in a way it had not erupted for anything else all evening, including the championship final, and the championship final had been genuinely excellent. This was different. This was the sound of people witnessing something that had updated their model of what was possible. And here is the thing that makes what comes next matter. Vera Holman was not someone who received updates quietly. She turned and looked at Bruce, and what was on her face had moved past the processing of the first exchange into something more volatile, more driven by the specific injury that comes from being shown something in public that you were certain you understood and didn't. She came at him again, not under any formal terms. The referee had not indicated another exchange. This was her decision, driven by the specific combination of wounded pride and genuine combat instinct, the same thing that had made her a serious competitor, for 15 years, now working against the occasion. Bruce read it before she committed and moved aside with the same economy he had been using all evening, and she found herself in the position her own momentum had created, which was further than she intended in the direction she had been going. She turned and came again. The audience was on its feet now, and the sound it was making had changed character from the appreciation of a moment earlier into something more concerned. People near the front were calling out. Several of the competition officials who had been on the periphery of the floor were moving toward the center. Gerald Parks was at the edge of the competition area saying something, his voice carrying the specific tone of someone managing an event that has moved decisively past the point of management. 2 of Vera's coaches from her corner had gotten to their feet and were crossing the floor toward her. Vera threw her most powerful combination, everything behind it now, not a technical demonstration, but a genuine attempt to make contact with someone who had spent the last minute and a half systematically demonstrating that her techniques did not reach him when he chose not to let them. He slipped the first part of the combination and redirected the second with a touch to her arm, and as her momentum carried her past him, he placed his hand on her shoulder and pushed very gently, just enough to add a slight directional component to the forward momentum she was already carrying. And she stumbled, not falling, catching herself on one foot, but stumbled clearly enough that 3,000 people saw it and understood that it had not been accidental. Vera's coaches reached her at that moment, one of them taking her arm, and she resisted briefly before the other said something in German that was clearly an instruction, and she stopped. Gerald Parks had reached Bruce's side and was saying something about how it was probably time to move things along. Bruce acknowledged this with the ease of someone who was not experiencing the situation the way Gerald was experiencing it. He picked up the championship trophy, which had been set down at some point in the proceedings. He walked back to the center of the floor, where Vera was now standing with her coaches, her breathing elevated, her expression doing the complicated work of someone who has been through something significant in public and is still inside the significance. He held the trophy out to her. She looked at it. She looked at him. Her expression was not what it had been when she first refused to take it, that cold decision she had made before she had any information. This expression was something that was still forming, still working through its own inventory, containing several things that were not yet sorted out from each other. She took the trophy. The audience responded. Bruce said quietly, "Just for her, you are a serious practitioner. Your technique is real. Tonight had nothing to do with that." She looked at him. Something moved through her face. She said, "Why didn't you hit me when you had the openings?" He said, "Because hurting you wasn't the point. You asked a genuine question. I gave you a genuine answer. That was enough. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that the people close enough to hear would describe differently afterward. Some saying she said I understand, and some saying she said I was wrong, and some saying she said something in German that the translator near the front row rendered as I see, which could mean either or both of those things. What is consistent across all the accounts is what happened next. She bowed, not the formal competitive bow of the beginning of a match, the bow that means something else, that belongs to the specific moment when a serious person acknowledges they have been shown something real. Bruce returned it, completely, and without any reduction in depth or duration. The audience responded one final time, and this last response was the warmest of the evening, warmer than the championship final, warmer than the moment he first walked out, the specific warmth that an audience generates when it watches something difficult resolve with honesty rather than with damage. If you made it to this part of the story, leave a like. Not for the algorithm, for this moment, because moments like this one deserve to be marked. Gerald Parks wrapped the ceremony in the next several minutes with the practiced efficiency of someone who has learned that the most useful thing you can do after an extraordinary thing happens is to handle the ordinary things professionally and let people sit with what they witnessed. Backstage, afterward, Vera sat with her coaches for a while without saying much. One of them, her primary coach for 6 years, asked her what she was thinking. She said she was thinking about something Bruce had said when they were talking on the floor. She said he had told her that her technique was real and that tonight had nothing to do with that. She said she was trying to understand what he meant by nothing to do with that. Her coach didn't answer immediately. Then he said, I think he meant that what happened tonight wasn't a judgment on your karate. It was an answer to a different question. She thought about this for a while. The different question was the one she had asked, publicly, in front of everyone, before she had any information. She had asked whether he was real. He had answered that. The answer was not a judgment on her 15 years of training, or her 51 wins, or her technique, or her work ethic, or any of the things that had gone into this championship. The answer was specifically to that question and nothing else. She had been treating it as the same question. It wasn't. She asked to speak with Bruce before he left the venue. One of the event staff went to find him and came back saying he was still in the building, near the exit corridor, and would be happy to speak with her. She found him in the corridor. He was standing with Gerald Parks having what looked like a calm conversation about something unrelated, and Gerald gracefully moved away when she approached. She stood in front of him and said, I said things tonight that were unfair. He looked at her. You said what you believed, he said. That's not unfair. It was the wrong belief, but you held it honestly. She considered this. That's a generous interpretation. It's the accurate one, he said. She said, Can I ask you something? He said yes. She said, The technique you use, the way you move. I've trained in Shotokan for 15 years, and I've studied other styles seriously. What I saw tonight, I don't have a category for. What is it? He thought about this in the way he thought about questions he considered worth answering, which was with genuine consideration rather than a prepared answer. He said, It started from Wing Chun, but it's been developing beyond that for a long time. The short version is that I've spent 20 years removing everything that wasn't true. Everything that worked under specific conditions, but not others. Everything that required the other person's cooperation to function. What's left is what I call Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, which is less about intercepting fists and more about meeting things at their origin before they become the problem they were going to become. She absorbed this. She said, The way you moved inside my combinations. You weren't responding to my techniques. You were responding to something earlier, he said. Your hip loads before your reverse punch. There's a small rotation that happens about a quarter second before your hand moves. I can see it from the time I need to not be where the punch is going. She worked her hips slightly, unconsciously, checking this description against her own internal experience of her technique. I didn't know I was doing that, she said. You didn't need to know, he said. It worked against everyone else. It only matters when someone is looking for it, she said. How do I fix it? He said, It depends on how deeply it's established. Probably months of deliberate work to meaningfully reduce it. You'd need to rebuild how you initiate the reverse punch from the weight transfer rather than from the hip rotation. She nodded, filing this. Then she said, Would you be willing to show me? Not tonight. Another time. He said, If you want to learn it, yes. She looked at him for a moment. I gave you a very public reason not to help me tonight. He said, That was tonight. This is now. She looked at him for another moment, working through something internal. Then she bowed. Not the bow she had given on the competition floor, which had been genuine, This one was smaller and more personal, the bow of a private acknowledgement rather than a public one. He returned it the same way. She went back to her coaches. He went to the exit. The corridor was quiet after that. Gerald Parks found his event notes and began the debrief he did after every major tournament, logging what worked and what he would change for next year. In his notes under the awards ceremony, he wrote a sentence that he later crossed out and then uncrossed because he decided it was accurate, which said, "Unplanned confrontation between champion and guest presenter." Resolved better than it started, crowd response was the strongest of the evening. He thought about adding more, but decided that sentence contained everything that needed to be there. The next morning, Vera was in the gym by 6. Her coaches were not there yet. She trained alone for the first hour, working through her standard routine, and at some point in that hour, she began to pay attention to her hip in a way she had not paid attention to it before. She felt the rotation. She felt where it happened in the sequence of her reverse punch. She felt, now that she was looking for it, the fraction of a second it occurred before her hand moved. She had thrown that punch 10,000 times. The rotation had been there every time. She had never noticed it because she had never needed to notice it. She began working on it. Slowly, pulling the technique apart at the initiation to find the moment before the rotation and see if she could start the punch from a different place. It was awkward at first, slower than her normal punch, less powerful, the kind of regression that comes from changing something deeply established. She kept working. 6 weeks later, at a regional competition, her reverse punch had changed. Not completely. Not enough that most observers would identify it as different. But the rotation was smaller, the tell was reduced, and 2 of her opponents in that tournament reported afterward that they had found her harder to read than they expected, based on her reputation. One of them, a practitioner who had studied her previous matches specifically, said that the tell she was known for seemed like it wasn't there the way it usually was. She won the tournament. She did not speak publicly about the evening at the Pacific Martial Arts Coliseum for a long time. When she eventually did, in a profile interview for a European martial arts publication, she described it simply as the most instructive evening of her competitive career, and said that she had learned something about the difference between what a technique can do in its designed environment and what it does when someone understands the environment differently. The interviewer asked her if she regretted what she said at the ceremony. She thought about this for a long moment before answering. Then she said that she regretted the spirit in which she said it, which was dismissive before she had information. She said she did not regret asking the question because asking the question had produced the most useful answer she had ever received. The interviewer asked what the answer was. She said the answer was that the training never stops, that however long you have trained and whatever you have won, the person across from you might be working from a different set of premises than you are working from, and your premises are not automatically correct just because they have produced results. She said she had been working from the premise that her system, seriously trained for 15 years, was sufficient to handle what she might encounter. One evening had shown her that this was a premise rather than a fact. She said she was grateful for that. She said it had made her better. The interviewer asked if she had continued to train with Bruce Lee. She said they had met twice more. She said both occasions were small and private, and that she did not intend to describe them in detail because they were working sessions rather than events. She said the thing she remembered most from all 3 encounters was not any technique. It was something he said at the end of one of the working sessions, when she was working through the initiation of her punch and getting frustrated with how slowly the new pattern was establishing itself. He said, "The time it takes is part of the teaching. If it came quickly, you would learn that it came quickly. Because it takes a long time, you learn what long time feels like from the inside, and that is the only way to understand it." She did not fully understand this when he said it. She said she understood it now, years later, after decades of training and teaching herself. She taught for a long time. Her school in West Germany produced several competitive champions across the years. Her students described her teaching with a consistency that suggested it had a clear shape, technically demanding and philosophically patient, the combination of someone who expected genuine work and understood that genuine work required time. When students asked her about her philosophy of development, she gave different answers, depending on what the student needed to hear. But the answer she returned to most often, the one that seemed to contain the most of what she had learned, was this. She said that the most important moment in any serious practitioner's development was the moment when they discovered that what they knew was a beginning rather than an arrival. She said that discovery was uncomfortable and that being comfortable with the discomfort was the whole work. She said she had had that discovery in front of 3,000 people in 7 seconds on a competition floor in Los Angeles, and that she was grateful it had happened that way, rather than more privately, because having it happen publicly had made it impossible to pretend she hadn't had it. The trophy from that evening sat on the shelf in her school's office for the rest of the time she ran the school, not because of the championship it represented, though she was proud of that, because of the evening it represented, which was the night she had been wrong about something important in front of everyone and had chosen, eventually, to be right about it. That's the complete story. Everything that happened and everything that followed from it. If this stayed with you, subscribe. There are more of these, and the ones coming are worth being here for. And leave a comment with one word. Tell me what the 7 seconds were really about. Not the technique, the thing underneath the technique. I'll read every one.